Cool. All right. So my name is Jose, and I'm going to show you here what my journey was to get my first job as a developer in Australia. So a little bit about myself. I came to Australia in 2014 with a very, very bad English, and I didn't know how to code. So yeah, here I'm going to show you what happened basically. So this is what I'm going to show you today. First of all, Fullstack. What is that, and why I went through this path. Also, how I became a software developer, divided in 7 parts. The skills that I think that got me this job, just a bit of summary, and then finally my learning recommendations for anyone who's getting started or thinking to do a career change. This is what I recommend. So first of all, Fullstack. What is that? It's nothing but a mixture between backend and frontend, plus a little overview understanding of Linux and IT operations, deployment, etc. It's important to say that you don't need to know everything. Actually, there's a bunch of things that I have no idea about that are apparently super important. But yeah, this is part of the journey. You just learn on the go, I guess. So why Fullstack? Because it's entrepreneurial. Basically, if you can code both backend and frontend, you have a company, you have an app, you have something that can generate money while you sleep. And yeah, worst case scenario, you can still be a freelancer. That's the fallback. You can always pitch work to your friends or family or people on different platforms, and you can get to build useful stuff, which is awesome. So yeah, this is my little story and how I got these learnings to become a full stack software developer. So I did a Bachelor of Business with Information Systems, and this really helped me to understand HTML, CSS, and JavaScript foundations, which is essential for anyone trying to get into this. I also learned algorithms and loops, which is fundamental as well. You need to understand what an algorithm is, something that is run structurally from top to bottom, and what's an if statement, what is a for loop, etc. And yeah, I learned this by doing projects with C++, Java, and .NET. But to be honest, I don't remember anything about these languages at all, but the concepts that I mentioned before, which are algorithms, loops, and variables. Yeah, well, it was very, very discouraging. These languages, like all of these syntaxes and all the compilers and things you had to set up just to get something basic going on. But yeah, I also learned databases and SQL or SQL foundations, which was very helpful to then get my first job in tech, which wasn't as a software developer, but it was, well, you'll see. And I also learned PHP. Not too much, but enough to understand Facebook, because at the time Facebook came out in 2007. So it was very fun for me to see what I could do with Facebook, join groups and connect with friends. And I sort of understood, or imagined at least, that there were some tables, databases going behind the scenes. So that was helpful. And then in my last year of uni, I had the best subject of the whole degree, which was entrepreneurship in digital businesses, which was an awesome subject. I just feel so lucky to have had that subject. It was taught by the founders of Dentalink, Roberto and Daniel. There was also the co-founder of Fintual, Pedro Pineda. And amongst my classmates, I had my friend Guillermo from Buda.com. There was also Alan from shipit.cl and someone else. I don't remember his name, but he's the founder of greenglass.cl, which is killing it apparently. So that was great. Yeah, and then between 2008 and 2012, I built a bunch of WordPress sites for friends and family that just wanted to have basic contact websites. And that was fun at the beginning until I got into, well, I'll tell you in a sec. But this was very useful to understand what a CMS backend was. Just the idea of that you can build a UI that some other user then can log in and post some content by themselves without you having to manage everything from scratch. And it was also to understand the concept of the template rendering, to have your data somewhere, hosting service, and then and database, and then just having this data, say the body content of a blog post and the title or the subtitle, and then having these pieces of data just rendering in a template, and not just having thousands of pages as I thought it was. And I also learned some other concepts such as DNS, hosting server, FTP, cPanel, local development, and which I don't use now. Like, you don't need to learn this stuff, but it was good to just for me to get an understanding about how things were connected to each other. And this is one way of doing things. Well, DNS obviously I still use, but yeah, the last thing there is the plugins. So at the beginning is like a lifesaver, and you feel like you can do anything with WordPress, which to some extent you can. But then you have the issue that these plugins need to be updated by the developers of those plugins, and the compatibility issues, you need to go and update them. Oh, it's hell on earth. And this is the thing that I value the most out of WordPress, my WordPress experience, which is the hacker or problem-solving mindset. This idea that you have this issue with a certain plugin, and then you need to find out how to fix this thing, because it's live in production, and your friend or whoever is telling you, why is this not working? And you just need to go on Stack Overflow and just figure it out. And sometimes come up with a workaround, sometimes doing some manual stuff. So yeah, that was a bit discouraging, but it helped me to start building this mindset, which I think is fundamental. Yes, so then, well, big jump between 2012 and 2016, but yeah, that's another story. So yeah, in 2016, I got this awesome role, which was an amazing experience in Corner Shop by Uber, a tech startup in Santiago. And I was the CRM and email marketing specialist. So I was sending a bunch of emails there, which helped me a lot with CSS. And just to try to make things look good. I mean, there was a UI UX expert, which was great, and I follow his guidelines, obviously, but then I still had to come up with this content and work with the designer to make it look right to some extent. And of course, I improved my SQL experience heaps, because this was behavioral marketing. So yeah, well, I would send very, very targeted emails. Maybe you got one from Jose from Corner Shop. That was me. And it was also great to get experience in the IT industry. By the way, I've highlighted this as bold because I think these were things that really helped me to get the job last Friday. And yeah, as I said before, I wasn't a developer. I wasn't doing much code at all, but it was a good experience because I learned concepts such as the QA's process, troubleshooting on Slack, understanding the product lifecycle, and understanding that there's different environments. And this idea of doing FTP, as I was used to with WordPress, it was just nonsense. Many things I learned. That's another video though. And one thing that is not bold, but it helped me a lot in my life, was having this founder mindset. Or not getting it really, but just working very close to the CEO, which was an amazing guy, very similar to Elon Musk or something. It was just life-changing, really. So I'm really grateful of that. And then what happened is that, I got this idea of, I was a bit lost and I was coming back to Australia. And I decided to become a data scientist because it was a very appealing career path. And so I decided to enroll into this data analyst Nanodegree from Udacity, which was great. I learned heaps. I learned Python, everything about the language, data structures, variables, compilers, many things that I cannot really explain. I also did some projects with data wrangling, which was super useful. I understood API, so I worked with the Twitter API to do a bunch of projects. I did web scraping, which was super fun as well. And I learned Git, something that should be bold, but it's not. And this helped me to start my GitHub profile. And this is bold because this is super important. So if you don't know GitHub, you should. Basically recruiters are hiring managers really, they're gonna go into your GitHub profile and they're gonna look at your heat map history commits, which is basically a history of how many contributions to any project you have done, how many times you have pushed to GitHub. And that's super helpful. So then in 2018, I got this role as, I didn't get a data scientist or data analyst role because it was very competitive, but I did get a role in data analytics or web analytics, which was sort of related, and it seemed fun and the guys were great. So I just accepted the offer, which again, it was a great experience. I think I'm very fortunate really, but I've worked hard as well. And this was great because it gave me local experience in Australia, obviously. It gave me client-facing skills, so learning better English, learning to deal with people, learning to communicate, learning to manage issues, which was important. And I learned Scrum, which I highly recommend because it's getting super popular. Scrum, by the way, is like a branch from Agile, from project management. And yeah, it's just nice, even for freelancing work. And I also learned some other web related. I got some web related experience, such as SEO and CRO, which stands for conversion rate optimization, which is basically a bunch of stuff to get things done and to improve the likelihood of someone converting your website. That means either signing up to your form or ended up buying something from your e-commerce. So I did a little bit of front end there, just making things look better and implementing pop-up forms and other CRM related stuff. And I also got to understand many SaaS, which are these software as a service, such as CMSs. So I worked with Squarespace, with WordPress a little bit, sadly. Another one that I cannot remember now. But I also work with Shopify, which is an e-commerce, and some other CRM systems such as HubSpot and Salesforce. And I did some data visualizations, which was nice. And I also got to know Zapier, which is an automatic integration service. So all these things opened my eyes. And yeah, this is when I decided to go back to the web development thing. Yeah, well, WordPress was very discouraging, and PHP, and it's a language that I do not like because PHP. But yeah, now with my knowledge of Python, I said, well, Python is great for data science, but maybe I can make it work for making my own business. And that's what is leading me to the next step, which is have had created a real life web app. So yes, I did something a bit risky and I quit the job and I decided to create a web app on Django, which is one of the Python web frameworks. And again, this gave me this problem-solving mindset a lot because I had to figure out how Django worked, which was a whole new world, and just getting things done. So I got the backend experience with Django, obviously. I got to use the front end. I didn't have to because Django is batteries included, but just to make it work nicer in some pages, I used this modern front-end framework, which is Vue.js, which I highly recommend. And then I learned about deployment. To be honest, first I started with AWS, and that was hard for a newbie. And then I just went to Heroku, and I loved it. I love it still. even though it's a bit expensive. And that's why I moved into Doku then, which is a mixture between Heroku and Docker. But it's a good pathway to get familiarized with Docker. And also it gave me some GitHub profile stats. So again, my heat map, so the history of how many commits, how much code I've written, that's on my GitHub profile, which is super helpful. And if you didn't tell, this is all bold, so it was all very useful. And now I did get the founder mindset, which I think is something that hiring managers want, because at the end of the day, when you start your own business, you are the last responsible of everything. So that was useful as well, but not crucial to get the job. And yeah, so last year COVID hit, and sadly the business didn't work as planned. So I started freelancing, which was again a great experience as well. So because I had built this app, which was in production, I was able to show this to a couple of friends or people that I knew. And one of them said, well, can you help me build my app? I've got this idea, I've got the budget. Can you build it for me? And I said, sure, of course. So that was another project that helped me a lot to get my first job. So what did I get out of this? GitHub profile. So more commits, more coding, more experience. Again, client-facing skills, which was great. And I got to do projects with Python. So I built an ETL pipeline. This is actually in 2018. This is something that I was doing parallel to my full-time job. I had my first client as a freelance client. It was someone that I met here when I was working in another random job in a warehouse. And they were building they had an e-commerce. So they were selling over Shopify, their own website, and also through eBay. But the inventory wasn't talking to each other because they had a lot of products. So what I did is I built an ETL pipeline, which is basically extract, transform, and load, which is a technique that I learned in the data analyst Nanodegree. And then basically with AWS and Lambda, I built this thing that runs every Friday, and it calls the API of Shopify and the API of eBay, extract the data, the sales from the week, basically, and then it transforms the data to know how many units they've sold for each product. Anyway, I don't want to get too technical, but then it gives a report, an automated report that goes out every Friday to the CEO email. And then he knows how many units he has sold because he has a massive warehouse. And this is very useful. And to be honest, this is the first SaaS that I built because I'm charging him as a subscription-based project. And this is, again, something that really opened my eyes about, wow, I can provide value and charge a subscription that can bring me money while asleep. This was another motivator to quit my job and try to learn Django, which is not something that I recommend to everyone. Like if you have kids and you're watching this, please don't take weird risks like that. I only did that because many things. So yeah, I also got to build a web scraper with a friend that he wanted to include me in his project, and I learned heaps from him. He's a developer from Peru. And I use Celery, Redis, Selenium, and also I learned Bitbucket, which is very similar to GitHub, but I put Bitbucket here because this is the first time that I got to work as a team, which is super useful for every interview that I've had. With Bitbucket, I learned not only Git commit, but Git merge, Git pull, Git rebase, which are things that you would use in a team-based environment. And I also learned more about AWS. I deployed to some EC2 instances. Well, Lambda, I had learned that before, and obviously S3 and a bunch of other services. AWS is huge, it's massive. But yeah. And I also learned SSH and Linux, of course. The last bit this year, when I've been looking for jobs, yeah, I've done a bunch of technical assessments. So every time how it works is that when you apply for a job, you might get a first initial call, just a quick one, and then they will give you, if you're successful with the first screening part, they will give you a technical assessment. Say, build this, I don't know, widget for the weather widget. Build it with React or with Vue or whatever, or build this thing that on Django, on Python even, that is gonna just, I don't know, just merge data compared to something, whatever. And then out of this stuff, I've learned heaps. First, I learned about O notation, which I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I also learned about testing, about test-driven development, things that you don't really need to know, but they've been really helpful just for me to talk about in the interviews. Domain-driven design, behavioral-driven design, which are continuous integration and continuous delivery, and Docker, which is something really popular now. It simplifies everything and is the starting point of Kubernetes and all these for massive companies and apps. So yeah, this is a summary of the skills that I've acquired over the years. So as I said before, the hacker problem-solving mindset, having done Python projects, and especially because this is something that helps me to talk about interviews, because on the interviews, they always ask you about, tell me about a time that blah, 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 something happened. And I'm like, whoa, when I was doing this project, this freelance gig, I had this issue and I added value by doing this. I used Python in this way to do that, blah, blah, blah. And also help me to understand APIs, which is something super important if you want to be a full stack developer, because APIs is how your front end is going to communicate to your backend, obviously. And then I got the backend demonstrable experience with Django and the app that I built, as well as front end, same thing, but with Vue. And I got to deployment, which is another area which is important to demonstrate. And this is with an asterisk, so it wasn't fundamental because, as with these modern backend frameworks, you don't necessarily need to know SQL, especially now with these NoSQL databases. But yeah, for this particular job that I was hired, they actually liked that I knew SQL, because then you basically understand what Django is doing in the back of the scene. And they also liked me because I knew Scrum, which is something that I learned at the digital agency that I worked before. And these are things that are not skills, but help me in my self-promotion and getting a job for sure, which is the GitHub profile thing that I told you before. It's super important. I mean, not super important, but if I'm going to hire someone and they don't have any evidence of coding, well, that's a red flag. So another thing that I did is having a killer resume. I really iterated this thing many times, over and over. And yeah, you need to get a template. Like, don't use Microsoft Word. Don't use even Google Docs. Just get a template from Canva. They're awesome and they're looking great. And if you can display that, even if you're applying, moreover, if you're applying for a front-end role or a full stack, you need to demonstrate that you can make things look nice, or at least not horrible. So definitely get a template from Canva. LinkedIn and Premium. This is super important. Like LinkedIn Premium, if you can afford it, it's worth every buck. So I would totally recommend that. Not only because you can tell who's looking at your profile, whatever, that doesn't matter, but I think the algorithm works best for recruiters if you're premium. And also make sure that you're open to new roles. Not for everyone. I don't want you to have like that purple thing, so lame, but just for recruiters to know. And this is a bonus, not mandatory though, that I had the client-facing skills because of the freelancing and consulting I had done. I had experience in the IT industry with the startup that I mentioned before. And then I had cultural assimilation, which was a big plus because of my girlfriend. She's Australian. And that helped me to, well, and just having mutual conversations. This is not essential again, but it really helped me to just pick the language, because Australian is a very specific language, and it's different to say hello, to say good day, mate, for example. So yeah, you can bond with people if you talk their slang. But again, this is not mandatory. As I said before, I know many cases of Latinos and foreigners that have landed jobs here in Australia, and they were basically recruited from their home countries. So yeah, this is my learning recommendations now. Disclaimer, only for full stack. If you want to become a front-end developer, obviously just learn one framework, say Vue or React. If you want to become a back-end developer, just do that. Say use Ruby or Laravel or Django, obviously. So yeah, first step, if you're just getting started, obviously HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and Git, very important. You're not going to bypass Git. Git is super useful, and the sooner you learn it, the better, really, for your own experience, your own coding experience. Like, you're going to waste so much time if you don't keep track of your changes, because you're never going to know what the hell you're doing. And then this is an idea. Well, before I talk about it, I haven't done this, but if I was going to do this all again from scratch, this is how I would do. So the problem is that, as you know, it can take months, if not a year, to get a job as a developer, right? So this can be very daunting and discouraging. So I strongly recommend you should start freelancing, because this is going to help you to build your portfolio. It doesn't need to be like a formal portfolio, but if you have websites that you can display to your recruiter, that's going to say more than anything. Same with your GitHub profile. Every time you're working on a client's project, then you push those changes to your own repo, and then your GitHub profile gets better and better. So this is what I would do. I would start with the low-hanging fruit, say your friends and family or the little business down the corner, and then you can go and say, well, with social distancing, you can go and say, hey, I'll build a website for you. I'll build you a CMS. And maybe they already have one, but maybe it looks shit. So you should go and, well, I forgot to mention, but there's a very useful Chrome extension called Wapalizer. And with Wapalizer, you can see what technologies are built with that website. And so if it's a website that is already using the latest technologies and it looks shit, you can go and say, look, you're not using this properly, so I recommend you should do this and that. You can get much more clients, and I'll do it for free, not for free, but for very little money. And that's going to be a motivator for you to keep going through this path. And you don't need to become a developer all of a sudden, but this is really going to help to your ego boosting. So yeah, I would recommend to start with a CMS. That's important because everyone wants a website. Say your cousin is a lawyer or an architect, and they want to display their work, and they want to be able to put their pictures up or whatever. So a CMS is perfect for that. You're not gonna build it from scratch with Django or React. It's not worth it. But yeah, you can get started with Squarespace if you've never done anything. That Squarespace is the easiest way to do anything. Or well, Wix. I've never used Wix, but Squarespace is very nice. You could do that. Yes, you could do WordPress. That's what I did. But I would recommend to go a step forward, to be a little bit courageous, and go with Wagtail. Now, Wagtail is a CMS that is built on top of Django. Django, again, is the web framework. It's is the best Python web framework. So you don't really need to learn Django right away. I don't recommend that because it could be like a rabbit hole. But I would recommend going with Wagtail because that's a CMS that it's a beautiful CMS that is going to give your client a nice interface to upload the content. And it's going to give you a little bit of Django so you can get your hands a little bit dirty and practice your Git and everything. So yeah, that's my CMS recommendation. And on top of that, you can use Tailwind CSS. That's another shortcut. Tailwind CSS, if you don't know what that is very similar to Bootstrap. So it's a CSS framework. Just because you don't need to write every CSS rule from scratch, there's these frameworks which are utility-based. So you use them within the markup, within the HTML thing. You can put your class, and then you have a shortcut that it's already written by someone. And it can make your website look awesome. Very little code, very little CSS, and it just looks great. And then Heroku would be my go-to thing, just because it's so simple. You don't need to deal with anything infrastructure. Heroku is a platform as a service. So you don't need to go to the lower level, which is infrastructure as a service, which would be AWS or something similar. So yeah, Heroku for beginners all the way. And if you do need e-commerce, you can check in some Shopify API. So you don't really need to write everything from scratch, payment gateways and all that stuff. You can just do Shopify API on top of your Wagtail CMS. And I think that's an ideal situation for becoming a freelancer. What do we got next? Yeah. After that, after you've done a few clients with your freelancing CMS developer, then I would recommend to learn a front-end framework. Which one? Vue.js. Why? Because it's way easier than React. The documentation is awesome. There's tons of videos. And it's just simpler. The syntax, everything is nice. And then maybe you could decide whether to apply to a front-end role position or whatever. But I would definitely start applying to everything whilst freelancing. And then I recommend learning the Django REST framework if you're using Wagtail and Django, just because that's going to allow you to use your Wagtail CMS in headless mode, which means you can build an API and then you can check in your front end on top of that API. So then your user can still upload stuff through the CMS in a nice, friendly UI. But then you can get to write Vue.js applications, which are much more nicer, modern, and it just looks great. And then you can extend that even to a mobile app or something. It's just the possibilities are endless, really. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. And then obviously at the end of the day, you're going to learn Django, which is something that I recommend 100%. It wasn't easy for me in the beginning, I have to admit that. But it's just so powerful. And you get to learn so many things just by reading the documentation. It's awesome. And yeah, if you don't know much about Django, well, Instagram was originally built on Django. Eventbrite was built on Django. The NASA website is on Wagtail, I think. And yeah, it's just Python. It's just Python. It's maybe you've heard of Ruby on Rails. Well, this is the same, but on Python, and it's great. A lot of big community, and there's a lot of support. Yeah, well, I just can recommend it enough, really. So yeah, next, there's no next. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. And if you find this video helpful, obviously, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And that's it.